Ugly offense in the Pelicans' second preseason game. Are we back to worrying and looking like last season? Not yet, because there's some easy fixes the Pelicans can make to get back to scoring. It's a live post-game episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all, live post-game show, a little Locked On Pelicans After Dark, if you will. It's about 9:30 p.m. Central when we're going live. I was here. We were all watching the game. Why not just do the show right now, interact with y'all, answer your questions in the chat. So we'll talk about what went wrong for the Pelicans offense, how they can fix some of that. I want to look at a little bit of Zion at the 5, and we'll chat with all y'all. This will be a little bit less interactive than we normally do the live shows, just because there's stuff I got to cover from that game. But I'm happy you're here, and please, if you are an everydayer of the show and you support the channel like that, let me know in the YouTube comments, in the live chat, and everything here. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Okay, let's get into it because that was rough. Pelicans losing to the Houston Rockets 120-87, preseason game number 2 in Birmingham. This one was just bad by the Pelicans. You know, really what they struggled with was 21 turnovers in the first half. And we'll focus on that, but not all turnovers are created equal or made the same here. And you really kind of actually saw that in this game. So I don't know if the turnover is actually as bad as we think. We're looking at the offense in preseason because that's what needs to be fixed. That was the big struggle last season with this team. So they've got to get this right. And the early returns in game 1 were good. This team just came completely flat, right? Like there was no energy with this squad whatsoever. They didn't really look like they wanted to be there for some reason. See, Jessica Anderson says this was the hardest game to watch. Like it was pretty brutal. You know, they kind of abandoned their entire offensive philosophy in this one. Did you see the same kind of ball movement as you did in game 1? No, absolutely not. And this is just, how do you fall apart like that in the second game? I don't know. It's really disappointing to see. No real off-ball movement. Zion being ignored for long stretches of time. And trust me, we're going to be talking about that in this show. Just bad all around. Super disappointing for the Pelicans. Like, we don't need to read too much into preseason. It's a meaningless game. We've seen this team do well in preseason before and then come out flat in the regular season. We've seen them struggle in preseason and then be okay during the regular season. So you don't want to make sweeping conclusions. I see some of y'all doing that in the chat over there, which is fine. Throw them in there. Don't spam the chat, though. But it's preseason. Take everything with a grain of salt, but you would have liked to have seen better than this, right? The energy certainly has to be better. So let's start with the turnovers because that was a big part of the problem, particularly in the first half. 21. When you look at a lot of those, though, these weren't turnovers due to a new offense and trying to figure it out or anything like that. These were just like mistakes, like sloppy play. Bad interior passes, trying to force a pass through a lane that isn't there. You know, they had 2 or 3 bad lobs in the first half too. Those were a lot of the turnovers. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So about half of those, I'd say, were just kind of like self-inflicted, like really dumb things that you would hope as preseason goes on gets cleaned up a little bit, that you're not making as many bad lob passes, that you realize some of those things aren't going to be there at all in the interior lanes and stuff like that. So I think those get fixed. The problem of the turnovers that I had was when guys would just kind of like drive into traffic. You know, these were just kind of process turnovers, if you will, for a moment. And you could kind of see what the Pelicans were doing, but they would oftentimes particularly with Zion at the 5. And again, we'll talk more about that. He's got to have the ball. And if he doesn't, and guys are dribbling kind of near him, but he's not used in an offensive action, it creates a problem. And it creates too many bodies. Spacing doesn't exist and a turnover happens. And that's really what you saw in this game. How many times did we see Brandon Ingram with the ball or CJ with the ball kind of driving and attacking the basket when Zion was down low? Like, that doesn't work. That's not going to work at all. There's going to be too many guys there. They need to really get Zion used off ball better. And they did not in this game. He was either standing in the corner or just standing around. Zion Williamson is a generational player that has a court gravity like very few we've seen before. So to have him standing around doing nothing, one shot in 17 minutes in the first half is unacceptable, isn't the way to go. At the start of the second half, they went to him twice. He didn't score every time, but they got him the ball and they wanted the offense to kind of account for him. And the Pelicans immediately started picking up their scoring. They started doing a whole lot better. It doesn't mean they need to go fully back to point Zion, but having him just stand around as almost a decoy is not the way to do it. We heard a lot in preseason, in training camp, as I hit my hand there, because I'm so angry over a preseason game. I'm not. You shouldn't be that upset over preseason either. Creole Tatted says Willie Green needs to be held accountable, with accountable in all caps. It's one preseason game, y'all. We don't need to go into that reaction with it. What happened, as Ryan S. says, that's what we're trying to explain. Craig says that was rough. It absolutely was. We can talk about that, but we don't need to jump to conclusions just yet, because they did look good in the first preseason game. What you saw was just them using Zion really poorly, I think, off ball. We had heard a lot of how they wanted to use him as a screener, as the roll man in the pick and roll. Did you see one Zion, Brandon Ingram pick and roll, really? There should have been multiple. Zion and CJ McCollum pick and roll. They weren't doing things like that. And that kind of makes me go, why not? Why are we just putting Zion in the short corner, similar to what they did with Jackson Hayes last year, where you put a non-3-point shooting threat there, so it doesn't actually help you space the court, and you're just kind of stuck. And that's a waste of Zion's talent. This is a guy who scores 70% at the rim. They need to try and get him to the rim. And they weren't doing things like that in this game. There are some solutions, though. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that coming up here next, and we'll answer more of your questions, read more of your comments. Coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Before we do that, though, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. And the app is super easy to use. Spreads, player props, over-under, same-game parlays, bet a little bit of money, win potentially a bunch of money. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL and the official sportsbook of Locked On. Okay. Let's get back to talking about what happened to this team, to this game with Zion and all of that, because that was a awful preseason game. But of course, first, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. If you're here in the live show, we got a lot of y'all in here, which is really fun. So I'm glad y'all are staying up with me to break down the offense, what we saw. You can watch this on Friday if you didn't catch it live, where we're kind of talking about where the offense fell apart. We looked at the turnovers earlier, right? Half of them I'm not really worried about. The other half are kind of like, stop not running your offense and run your offense, and this fixes itself a little bit. But the biggest story coming out of this, right, is how to use Zion and how poorly, right, he was used in this game. He shouldn't be taking 3 shots in how many minutes of action? 3 field goal attempts in 22 minutes. Didn't get to the free throw line once. Was basically just a complete non-factor. Is there ever a situation where Zion Williamson should be a complete non-factor out there on the court? Like, no. This is just egregious, right? Like, if I'm slowing down here, it's because I'm trying to read all your comments too, because I see how upset everyone is and I get it. they have to use Zion better. As I said before we went into the break here, they talked about using Zion in the pick and roll more. Use him in the pick and roll. They didn't do that. Using Zion off ball should not be you just stand on the 3-point line and you wait. And at a certain point, Zion being one of the best scorers in the league when he's out there healthy on the court, don't you think they need to just get the ball to him? Like if you're the coaching staff, if you're others, it's really weird that when you're struggling to score, you don't just dump the ball to Zion and let him do things. Shoot, just go back to the isolation style of ball that you're trying to get away from, because you know what? You get points that way when Zion's the one that's scoring. So it's just weird. Like what was everyone just not trying, not thinking, not really doing their thing? I will say once, and look at that starting lineup and the lack of using Zion. And maybe this will be a whole show, actually. This sounds right. Thanks for helping me workshop this with y'all here in the live show. Compare the Zion at the 5 lineups to Zion with the starters. The Zion at the 5 lineups worked in this game for the most part, right? Of all of the things that did work. Do you know why those lineups worked in this one a little bit more? It's pretty obvious. Zion was the focal point. That's the whole point of a Zion at the 5 lineup. It's basically get him the ball and put a bunch of shooters among others around him and let him create. They didn't do that here. And even some of those Zion at the 5 lineups, you saw one with CJ out there. CJ was trying to handle the ball a little bit too much. And it's like at a certain point, everyone just chill out, let Zion do the thing. And that's where this was so frustrating. There was a sequence, and I wrote it down. It was maybe midway through the second quarter where Zion at the 5 lineup, CJ was out there. CJ had the ball, drives to the basket where Zion is. So too many bodies, too many people there. Extra defender. CJ gets stripped because there's no room for him to go. And on the other end, the Pelicans kind of force a shot, but because they're so undersized and they're playing defense in transition, they give up an offensive rebound, and it's 2 second chance points for the Houston Rockets. Like, that can't happen. That Zion at the 5 lineup, one, needs to score because they're going to struggle. They can generate the looks you want, but they're going to struggle defensively, I think. So with all of that said and everything, you need to make sure those lineups score by giving the ball to Zion and not just doing kind of dumb things. And that's what it really was and what I thought. And you see like kind of the best and worst of the Zion at the 5 lineups with all of that. So let's answer some of your questions here. West Bank Rick, good to see you in here. If you're an everydayer, again, let me know in the comments down below. Mr. Bird says unforced errors here. Thomas Atkinson says mental errors. A lot of those bad passes definitely were that. Reginald Joseph says with no primary point guard, turnovers will be excessive. B.I.'s a good passer, y'all. They just need to actually use guys in other ways, right? B.I. with the ball and Zion setting the pick works for me. I like that. That I don't really have a problem with. It's just kind of on overall like lack of cohesiveness in doing the things that they just kind of like really need to do. That's kind of like one of the biggest things. Stephanie Wilson says, Jake, they played very horrible, too many turnovers, no rebounding. They got to get this in order before the season starts. They do, because I said in yesterday's show, depending on when you're listening to this, they absolutely need to get off to a good start this season. The whole year really kind of hinges on it, I think, and what they might do at the trade deadline. Rebounding was a great point there too from Stephanie, because they did lose the rebounding battle, and at one point like fairly poorly. They gave up 30. Yeah, they got crushed on the glass for the most part, and it wasn't the greatest thing. I got to look at the second chance points here, and let me see if I can pull that up live as I'm talking to y'all. Second chance points, 18 for Houston. That's not too bad with everything. No, this one's worth noting. 26 points in the paint for the New Orleans Pelicans. They were one of the top teams in the league with that last season, but they didn't in this game because they didn't get the ball to Zion and they were settling too much. Every now and then, you just need to get the ball to Zion and let him do his thing, let him cook, and it'll end up really being okay. So we have more questions here. I want to do, before we get into your questions in the live chat, we have the Locked On Pelicans Insiders group on Subtext. You got a 14-day free trial if you want to join it. I wasn't tweeting. I was talking to them during the game. And as I always do for the insiders when we do the live show here, your question for sure gets read. So I've got 2 questions from the insiders group that they sent during the game here. First one is, Jake, have you seen that patented Zion explosive first step at practices? Because I haven't really seen it yet in the first 2 games. I realize it's early, but he almost looks gun shy to me. I don't really know what went on in this game for why you just didn't see him doing his thing. Maybe it was kind of by plan. Maybe they're trying other things. Maybe he just seemed disengaged for whatever reason. And look, bad days at the office definitely happen. But yeah, he's looked good in practice. Everything we've seen, he looked good at the open practice too. He's not fully in game shape yet. You can see that he needs a little bit more of just being out on the court playing, but I don't really see anything physically to worry about with Zion Williamson. The other question here is interesting too, and it's tied to Zion as well. Is there any reason to suspect that Zion doesn't feel like he's wanted here? I've noticed a few things that seem, in particular, where it seems like he's got this look on his face and a couple of other things. No, I think he wants to be here. I do think he wants to be here, and I think right now he has a better relationship with the team than he ever has before. When I was speaking to him at Media Day, I asked him about the changes they made and like the way he spoke about the team, like listening to him and kind of working with him. I think is important. He also had a really rough summer where I think he found out maybe like not everyone has his best interest at heart. And so he's looking for the people that do, and I think he feels the Pelicans do. So I think he's in a much better spot now when it comes to his relationship with the team, and I don't think there's anything we need to worry about him like wanting out or anything like that. Like I think everything's good, and I do think he's genuine when he talks about wanting to be here, loving New Orleans, wanting to win for the city, all of those things. So coming up next, more of your questions. I'll interact with y'all for a little bit. We won't go as long in this show, but that's what we're going to do here. Coming up next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday for y'all, breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, the #1 Pelicans podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Comment down below on YouTube. And if you want to support the channel, become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday. Going to have a lot coming for y'all in the next couple of weeks. I can't wait for the start of the regular season. If you want to support the channel even more, the Locked On Pelicans Insiders Group, it's on Subtext, 14-day free trial, $4.99 a month after that. If you don't like it, don't worry about it. Show's still here. So a couple things quickly before we wrap up kind of the things I want to talk about, and then we just all chat for a couple of minutes here. I liked what we saw from, as I completely blank on who played in the game here. Where are all my numbers? Jordan Hawkins made a back-to-back threes, scored, I think it was like 10 straight points for the New Orleans Pelicans very quickly, looked good, tried to show more to his game. I was very happy with how he played with everything. Dyson Daniels too. 3 of 4 from 3. That shot falling and him being a plus on offense is going to be a really big deal. He is very good defensively. He can move the ball. I loved what we saw from him. He's showing a little bit of growth right there as well. Last note, and then your questions, I promise, is I loved a lot of what CJ did. A lot of what CJ did, working well off ball, trying to relocate to the three-point line, trying to take more corner threes than he did last year. That's a really important thing. They need more three-point shooting. They need to get those from corner threes. He started to show that with everything. Carlito's Way says, Hawkins shot looking good. Yeah, it looked good, and he's a tough guy. Took the charge out there. I think Dyson took a charge too. They were out there really doing a lot of those hustle kind of plays, and I loved seeing that from the team here. So I'm pretty happy with overall like what we what we did here. So with that stuff, not everything else. Okay. Buki says the team was playing soulless. Yeah, they looked like they didn't want to be there. I don't know whether it was because it was in Birmingham or anything else. They didn't have it. And look, it happens. That happens, particularly in preseason. It's an 82-game schedule. There's a lot. It's going to happen. But this one, I don't know. Y'all need to get off to a better start. Like, you know how pivotal this year. You got to show it. You talked about it a lot, so it's still disappointing. West Bank Rick, who I see at almost all the Pels games, so I'm in a different area now. Do you think Zion will get to the free throw line 5 to 7 times a game this season or more? I think more. What his career is like 8 or 9 per game, something like that. 8 probably. I think he'll get close to that average. Working off ball, he's still going to get fouled. It's better to foul him than it is to let him go to the free throw line. He's averaged 8.4 free throw attempts for his career. Like he's never averaged under 7.4. So yes, I definitely see him getting to the free throw line on that kind of level there. Where are all the other questions there? So that's kind of what happened in this game. I'm scrolling through, looking at all of your things. I see T. Walsh is an everydayer. I love that. Craig says Houston is an extremely talented young team. Yeah, they're hungry, and they showed they were hungrier than the Pelicans, so that's super disappointed. Harold Augustine says everydayer as well. Cliff Dugar says, does Zion have a shot? He took a mid-range one in this. You don't want him taking mid-rangers. You want him going to the hoop and scoring. That's kind of the big thing. Should have bought a Honda, which is a great name. Has a good question. What changes from now to the regular season? Why should we not be worried? You shouldn't be worried because these games don't matter. Just like Summer League doesn't matter. We've seen the Pelicans go 5-0, 4-0 in preseason and not be good in the regular season. The win-loss of preseason like just has zero correlation, right? There's like almost no correlation in the NFL either. You know, what you should worry about is how clunky the offense looked in this game. You know, they have a quick turnaround. They're playing Saturday in Atlanta. Let's see what changes, right? We've got to evaluate preseason as a whole, not just on a single game basis, as these guys are still kind of working through some things. If they cut out 10 of those turnovers, which I think they easily could have done, I don't know if they win this game, but they look like a different team. So it's tough just to know what to make of all of this. But you see flashes of what they should do, and you definitely see what they shouldn't do. If we can see what they shouldn't do, in theory, they also see what they shouldn't do. Not always the case, but there you go. And so all of these things are like very fixable. I don't think anything here is something that I look at and is like, this is just extremely broken and we need to completely freak out with all of that. Silver Wolf says, I'm here but late. Thanks for joining. I don't know what time it is where you are, but probably morning? I don't know. 19th, it says Zion visibly didn't care tonight. Yeah, he just looked out of it. Maybe it was because of the way they were using him. Maybe it's something else. There should have been more Zion, you know, on him, on the coaches, on the other players to find him and everything like that. Philip Jones says, is it time for someone like Bismack Biyombo? No, like I don't want them paying the luxury tax and trading away a good player or screwing things up for the future to sign Bismack Biyombo. They don't need a ton of rim protection for what the defense does. That's something I've been saying. I did a show earlier in the summer, and if you're an everydayer, you know this, saying they don't need more rim protection. They're actually okay there. They just don't look at the percent that teams shoot there. Look at how few times teams shoot there. This one was just kind of weird. Adrian says, hi. Hi, Adrian. How are you? What else do we have to see here? Philip Jones says, yeah, JV needs to go. I mean, they're looking to move him. He doesn't fit, right? Cold Case 1 says, blow it up. This team can't draft. You know, I don't know. They've got Jose Alvarado. They drafted Zion Williamson. I mean, that's not necessarily saying much. Trey Murphy looks great. Herb Jones was drafted too. Everything's hit or miss. It's all a mixed bag, I think. But they've done an overall good job. You know, could you have gone for Cam Whitmore instead of Jordan Hawkins? Like, sure, and the fact that Whitmore fell was kind of surprising, but in general, they've done a good job. I still think Dyson Daniels looks like he's going to end up being an okay player with all of that. So I think they're going to be fine in that regard. Silverwolf says, real question, if Zion will get the calls like he deserves this season. He should be getting the line more. Like he should, not in this game because he didn't have it, but we just answered this. He's going to get to his career average, I think, around like 8-9 per game. That's not going to, change anything. Black Order says we need to make a trade by December 15th, November 15th. Those are the two dates to kind of watch as other players will start to get traded. And there you go. Brian Rongstad says, Jake just sat down to work. Went to listen to yesterday's show and heard about the live show. Love what you do. Not an everydayer, but definitely listen multiple times a week. I appreciate that. Listen when you can. If you can't listen every day, that's all right. But if you listen one day per week, try making it twice. You're doubling up. If everyone does that, that significantly helps the show, promotes the show even more. So I think that's something everyone can try and do a little bit here. Brian also says, is this the players going against the coaching? No, I think this is just an off night. Like that happens. Off nights just happen, and it's not the biggest deal, particularly in preseason. You're even going to see games like this in the regular season. It's 82 games. You're looking at it on a long timeline, not a short one. That's something to keep in mind. So let's call it here for the night. I got to keep the show to time it throughout the season. So I love doing the live shows with y'all. Thank you so much for being here with me. Back on Monday, we'll recap the game on Saturday, talk more about preseason, Zion at the 5 next week, offensive changes, all of those things. That's all going to be coming up on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all on Monday.